The morning of September 19, 1944, at 11:23 a.m., was a moment of stark terror for Private First Class Walter Kowalski. He was crammed inside his M4 Sherman tank near Roat, France, facing 3 German Panzer IV tanks that were closing in from only 800 yards. Walter's hands were shaking. Just 2 days prior, the loader he had replaced was killed when a Panzer round penetrated their turret. Walter was only a mechanic, a replacement with the unenviable task of being the new loader, and he'd only ever loaded 4 practice rounds in his entire life. Around him, the tank descended into chaos. The gunner was screaming about the traverse speed, the commander was yelling coordinates, and the driver was frantically reversing the tank toward a hedgerow. Walter's singular, critical job was to quickly ram the heavy 75mm shell into the gun's breech. Grabbing the first 38-pound high-explosive shell from the ready rack, he found his hands slick with a mixture of sweat and oil. The standard procedure, relentlessly drilled into every loader at Fort Knox, was simple. Grip the shell nose forward, align the brass base with the breech, slam it home, and step clear. A skilled loader could complete this sequence in 4 seconds, 5 if they were rattled. Loaders were always taught to face the breech head-on. However, Walter was left-handed, a seemingly minor detail that became a critical obstacle in the M4 Sherman's cramped turret. When Walter attempted to follow the standard face-forward procedure, his dominant left elbow slammed hard into the gunner's shoulder, causing the gunner to shove him away. The shell nearly slipped from his grasp just as the commander's screams intensified, the Panzers now only 600 yards away. In a moment of pure desperation and necessity, Walter abandoned all training. He executed a movement no manual had ever suggested. He turned his back to the cannon's breech. Reaching behind his body, he used his left hand to feel for the chamber's opening, while his right hand steadied the shell's base. He guided the shell's nose backward into the chamber, shoved it forcefully, and the breech mechanism caught and slammed shut. The gunner fired instantly without a word, and the explosive recoil sent a blast of hot metal and smoke backward, singeing the back of Walter's neck. He ignored the pain and the noise, the ringing in his ears, the cordite burning his throat. He was already reaching for the next shell, repeating the same unorthodox, back-turned motion, left hand guiding, right hand ramming, 3 seconds. The breech closed and the gun fired. The third shell followed in 2.5 seconds, and the fourth in just 2 seconds flat. Through the roar of the tank, the commander's voice finally cut through. 4 impacts, 4 kills. The engagement was over in 6 minutes, with the German tanks now burning a mere 400 yards away. A stunned silence fell over the crew. Walter stood motionless, his back still facing the gun, his hands black with powder residue. The commander climbed down and stared at him as if he had just grown a second head. Nobody, not according to any manual or safety protocol written since 1942, loaded a 75mm cannon backward. But it had just worked. Walter realized that he had discovered something the trainers at Fort Knox had entirely overlooked. His split-second innovation was about to change how every Sherman crew in the entire Third Army loaded their guns. The M4 Sherman was a necessary and important tank, but it wasn't designed to go head-to-head with German Panzers. Conceived in 1941, its primary role was infantry support, breakthrough operations, and to be reliable, easy to mass-produce, and simple to repair. Between 1942 and 1945, the United States Army built an enormous 49,000 Shermans. They were good, but they were not built for tank duels. The primary problem was the gun. The Sherman's standard 75mm cannon could only penetrate 3 inches of armor at 500 yards. This was sufficient to knock out an older Panzer III, but it couldn't reliably defeat a Panzer IV from the front. Against the formidable Panther or Tiger tanks, the shell was nowhere near potent enough. German designers knew this, and by late 1943, nearly every Panzer rolling off their production lines featured frontal armor impervious to a standard Sherman round at combat ranges. The Sherman's supposed advantages were speed, high mobility, and sheer numbers. American doctrine suggested that a group of 5 Shermans could overwhelm a single Panzer through flanking fire and maneuver. While the mathematics looked good on paper, the brutal reality was that 4 out of those 5 Sherman crews often died trying to achieve the necessary flanking position. Tanker crews bitterly called this the death ratio. During the summer of 1944 in France, for every German tank the Allies destroyed, they lost 4, sometimes 5 Shermans. A single Tiger tank at Villers-Bocage in June wiped out 25 Allied tanks in just 15 minutes. The following month at Goodwook, British units lost 200 Shermans in a single day. The men knew the stakes. Every tanker had seen the roadside wreckage, the burned-out holes, and the devastating sight of tanks brewing up when a Panzer round detonated their internally stored ammunition. A direct hit to the turret was almost always fatal to the loader first, who was positioned right next to the ready rack holding 20 shells. When that rack ignited, there was nothing left for burial. American tank commanders tried desperate measures to improve the survival rate. They added sandbags to the front glacial, welded spare track links to the turret, and some even painted their tanks to mimic command vehicles, hoping to draw wasted German shots on decoys. Yet, none of it addressed the core issue. The Sherman's gun could not frontally penetrate the armor of its opponent. In a tank duel, the crew that fired first usually won. This meant that rate of fire was the only real edge the Sherman crew possessed. A crew that could load and fire faster than a Panzer had a chance, not a great one, but a chance. The officially mandated loading time for the 75mm gun was 4 to 5 seconds per round. This time included grabbing the shell, pivoting, aligning the base, ramming it, and clearing the space for the gunner. Panzer IV loaders could match this rate. Panther crews were slower due to their heavier ammunition, but their gun could kill a Sherman from twice the distance, rendering the speed difference negligible. Tank schools rigidly drilled the standard method for weeks. Face the breech, 2 hands on the shell, ram straight forward. The motion was intended to be the safest, most repeatable, and most efficient. It worked perfectly on a stationary firing range at Fort Knox where no one was shooting back. But the designers and instructors had overlooked a crucial operational detail: the left-handed loader. Walter Kowalski was one of an estimated 3,000 left-handed loaders in the Third Army alone, a number that was neither officially tracked nor considered important. The rule was, if you were left-handed, you simply learned to load right-handed. On a practice range, the rule held. In the chaos of combat, however, that rule was costing lives. The M4 Sherman turret was incredibly tight, measuring only 7 feet across at its widest point. The loader stood on the right of the gunner sat on the left, and the commander stood above and behind. The gun itself recoiled 18 inches backward when fired, and the whole interior lurched as the turret traversed, meaning every motion had to be precise. A right-handed loader could smoothly pivot and load without colliding with the gunner. Their dominant right arm naturally aligned with the breech opening, allowing for an effortless, straight-on movement. But for a left-handed man, the standard procedure was a struggle. To face the breech, Walter had to twist his torso and use his non-dominant right hand. His dominant left arm, meant for control and power, would invariably swing out and smash into the gunner. In that instant of collision, the loader lost control of the shell, often fumbling the 38-pound round. The commander would shout, the tank would jerk, and seconds would bleed away, often proving fatal. Walter's backward method solved every single one of these problems. By turning his back to the breech, his dominant left hand was now perfectly aligned to feel for the opening and guide the shell in. This seemingly counterintuitive move gave him a clean, straight-line path to the breech. Moreover, it created more space inside the turret. The gunner could work without being elbowed, and the commander could lean down without hitting Walter's head. The entire crew gained much-needed room to maneuver. The most significant advantage, however, was psychological and physical. It was a natural motion. Right-handed loaders were taught a motion that required conscious, deliberate coordination. Under the extreme duress of combat, when fear and adrenaline took over, this coordination would fail, leading to fumbled shells. Walter's backward load, however, utilized his natural dominant hand dexterity and a simple pushing motion. It was an intuitive, unthinking action. meaning that when Walter was under fire, he loaded faster. The initial success on September 18th was the proof. Following a brief engagement, Sergeant Raymond Miller, the tank commander, asked how fast the loading had been. Walter hadn't been counting, but the gunner had. The crew realized Walter was loading in 3 seconds, sometimes less. This was faster than any loader they knew, potentially the fastest in the entire battalion. Sergeant Miller immediately told Walter to keep doing the forbidden move. He knew it violated every safety regulation in the field manual, but it was working. After the destruction of the 4 Panzers on September 19th, Sergeant Miller made a calculated choice. He knew the regulations, but he also knew the backward method worked and saved lives. He kept quiet about the violation. However, the astonishing success of Walter's crew, 4 kills in 6 minutes, was too significant to ignore. When a battalion is losing 2 tanks for every one it kills, any crew that consistently beats those odds becomes an instant legend. The method soon reached the attention of Colonel Creighton Abrams, one of the most brilliant and aggressive tank commanders in the Third Army. Abrams ordered Miller and Walter to demonstrate the technique during a special tactical exercise. Walter repeated the backward load, and the shell was seated in 2 seconds flat. Abrams only asked one question: "Does it work better than the manual?" Miller's answer was succinct: "Yes, sir. 2 seconds faster per round on average. Higher accuracy under fire, fewer fumbled shells, better crew coordination in tight spaces." Abrams fell silent as every tanker in the area watched, waiting to see if Miller and Walter would face charges. Then Abrams made a decision that would revolutionize the way American tank crews fought for the remainder of the war. He ordered every loader in his battalion to learn the backward method immediately. Abrams declared that he didn't care about the manual, he cared about kill ratios and crew survival. If turning one's back to a 75mm cannon kept his men alive, then that was the new standard. Within 48 hours, the technique had spread. The next stop was General George S. Patton, commander of the Third Army. When presented with the data and the demonstration, Patton, a man infamous for his adherence to discipline and regulations, was convinced. He immediately called his chief of staff and issued a direct order. Every tank battalion in the Third Army would adopt this loading method at once. He warned that any battalion commander who refused would be relieved, and any officer who attempted to court-martial a loader for using the backward technique would answer personally to Patton. The Third Army comprised 11 armored divisions and roughly 4,000 Sherman tanks. Within 2 weeks, Walter's seemingly impossible rule-breaking motion was standard practice across the entire command. Training officers demonstrated it to new crews, and veteran loaders passed it on to every replacement. Walter Kowalski's tank went on to survive a total of 9 more engagements between October 1944 and May 1945. His Sherman was hit 3 times, but he and his crew walked away each time. By the end of the war, his crew had destroyed 23 German tanks. Walter loaded every single one of those rounds, consistently using the backward method. By VE Day, he could load a 75mm shell in a staggering 2.3 seconds blindfolded. His hands knew the motion so completely that conscious thought was no longer necessary. After the war, Walter returned to Detroit and resumed his life as a mechanic. The backward loading method was eventually documented in post-war after-action reports. A historian who tracked Walter down years later to ask about the technique confirmed the story. Walter, ever humble, insisted it was nothing special, just something he'd figured out when his shoulder was hurt. The historian, however, published a paper calling it one of the most significant tactical innovations to emerge from frontline troops during World War II. It was estimated that the technique may have saved the lives of 300 to 500 American tank crewmen based on improved survival rates in the units that adopted it. Today, at Fort Knox, Kentucky, a restored M4 Sherman is on display. Its interior is preserved exactly as it looked in 1944, including the loader's position on the right side of the gun. The museum placard details the Sherman specifications: armor, gun caliber, and engine horsepower. It notes that American tank crews developed innovative tactics to overcome the Sherman's disadvantages against German armor. What it omits is the name Walter Kowalski and the story of the backward loading method. It doesn't mention that sometimes the most vital innovations don't come from generals or elaborate tactics or superior equipment, but from scared 20-year-old mechanics simply trying not to die. Wars are won by ordinary people making split-second decisions under fire, by soldiers who break the rules when the rules stop working. Walter Kowalski never sought to be a hero. He was just a left-handed kid from Detroit who found another way. It saved his life, and it saved hundreds of others.